This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meetinghouse. I'm coming to you today from warm, sunny St. Simons Island, Georgia, here in Glenn County. This is where the Meetinghouse was launched about 3 years ago. And I'm here today broadcasting out of Brunswick, Georgia, Louisville, Kentucky, and on live streaming on social media, YouTube and Facebook. We're here to have conversation about religion and American life. I always have the news. I have 5 news stories today brought to you by our sponsor, PerfectoCoffeeInc.com. You can go there and order your own coffee. I'm here today to talk about an article that was published this week about the Supreme Court and religious freedom, or broader, just the Supreme Court and religion. It's a fascinating article. It's right down the pike of what I'm interested in and of what has to do with what we're calling Christian nationalism or religious nationalism. I'm going to be talking about the news and this article with my longtime friend, fellow journalist, and columnist for the USA Today newspaper, Tom Krattenmaker. Tom, welcome back to the Meetinghouse.
Well, hi, Dwight. Thanks for having me. I hope you're doing well.
Yes, I'm doing fine, but tell me, what's the weather like in New Haven, Connecticut today?
That snow that we got over the weekend, and just in case you didn't hear,
Yes.
there was a blizzard up in these parts,
Yes,
all
we
throughout
heard.
New England. Lots of snow and freezing temperatures and ice, but today snow's melting. It's gray and 40-something degrees.
Good. Well, our engineer, Alex, is in Lexington, Kentucky, and they're getting slammed today, as is much of the country. I'm down here with my brother, who lives across the river from St. Louis, Missouri, where they really got slammed. He was going to go home, and then he decided to go south with me. And he said this morning that his family said there are 13 inches of snow in his front yard. I know he's glad to be here. So, and I'm glad to be here. As soon as the show is over today, we're going to get in the car and drive over the causeway to Jekyll Island. Sometime I will talk more about that. But let's start with the news, Tom. We're going to start in New York City. Vanity Fair, a fashion and cultural magazine, has published a profile on Jerry Falwell Jr. In the article, Falwell denies that he is a religious person. Article writer Gabriel Sherman quotes Falwell saying, quote, "Because of my last name, people think I'm a religious person, but I'm not," Falwell says in the piece. "My goal was to make them realize I am not my dad." Falwell suffered a very public and spectacular fall from grace and power when he was forced to resign as president of Liberty University following a series of scandals. Condé Nast, who publishes the magazine, is a global media company founded in 1909, now owned by Advanced Publications. It's located in the World Trade Center in New York City and attracts 72 million consumers in print, 394 in digital, 454 across all social platforms. That's quite a reach. Tom, do you have that kind of reach with your articles?
No, I don't. But that's such an interesting story, Dwight. So if I'm hearing you right, religious disaffiliation manifests even in the family of Jerry Falwell, the founder of the Christian right?
Not only in his family, in every single family. I've been keeping track of this. I've never done an article on it. I've never done a program on it. But there are several very prominent Christian leaders whose children have publicly rebelled against all of it. Not all
I
of
can think
them.
of some too.
Yes, we should do a whole show on it. and talk to these people. I've been interested for a long time in the way the children of devout Christians drift away, but Jerry Falwell Jr., he did more than drift, you know.
Well, right. And I had something more I wanted to say about this. I really
Yes,
appreciate you bringing this up because it sheds a lot of light on a lot of things. But when I hear now that Jerry Falwell Jr. does not consider himself religious, I think, well, that explains a lot.
it does.
It explains a lot about the way he conducted himself as Liberty
Absolutely.
president and as a Donald Trump surrogate, right?
Absolutely.
I picked up on something that Russell Moore wrote
Mhm.
about this just in the past couple of days. As he put it, Junior conducted himself more as a Trumpian business and political figure than as a Christian leader.
There's no
Moore put
question
it this
about this.
way. What's that?
There's no question about it. But here is what's so interesting about it. He says, because of my last name, people think I'm a religious person. It wasn't just because of his last name. He was the president of an institution, Liberty University, which touts itself as a major Christian institution in America. Regardless of who that person is and what their name is, we assume that they are a Christian scholar, a Christian administrator, a Christian disciple leading a university like that. So it wasn't just his name that led people to think, well, he must be a Christian of some sort. But
If he wanted people to really know where he was on the religious spectrum, he could have said something.
he could have said something. He didn't have to
But
make an
there's one
ass
more
out of
lesson from
himself.
this.
Go ahead.
One more lesson from this I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
It's another example of what happens to people who go all in on Trump.
Yes.
And like the degradation that befalls them. You know, of course, that Jerry Falwell Jr.'s devotion to Trump
Yes.
was at least 100%. Remember when a reporter asked him if Trump could do anything to cause Falwell Jr. to drop his support? And Jerry Falwell Jr. said, no, nothing. And look where he is now. And there's so many other figures who have been so devoted to Trump who are now in very dire straits
Very
and
dire
fallen
straits.
from grace.
Part of the answer to that is Trump had already done everything that normally disqualifies a person from the support of Christian people. He'd already done everything, except maybe murder somebody. But I know it's a strange tale about religion and American life. I know you followed it as a writer and as a thinker, as an author. And I have followed it the same way, plus being a preacher and a college administrator. So I have followed all of it. It's a sad, sad tale. And he's coming out. I wonder what he's going to do next. I don't know.
I have not heard. He's fighting a lawsuit. Liberty sued him.
Yes.
He's fighting that, but I don't know what else he's doing.
Well, I have personal knowledge of some of the inside story about the series of episodes that led to his fall from grace.
Involving the pool boy?
Not the pool boy, but involving other people who were involved. And I've been debating myself about whether to do a story on it or even a show on it. And I'm mulling. Of course, it would depend on whether somebody was willing to talk and, be a conversationalist about it. But I'll let you know about that.
You're in the discernment process about that.
I'm in a discernment process about whether I should say something or write something about it. You're exactly right. Now from Melbourne, Australia. Normally we focus on news in America, but I'm not a big Hillsong fan of their music, of their theology, of their kind of Christianity, but they certainly have had an enormous impact, and that's why I included this story in today's news. Brian Houston, the founding pastor of Hillsong Church in New South Wales, Australia, that's Melbourne, has surrendered all of his ministerial responsibilities in response to his indictment on criminal charges. Houston has been accused by the Australian police of covering up the sexual crimes of his father, Frank Houston, which of course was pedophilia. Hillsong is an influential global network of Christian communities with a strong presence in the United States, including New York City, whose pastor there, you remember, Tom, had to resign because he got involved like Falwell did.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, several leaders of Hillsong churches, not just in New York, but elsewhere, have been at the center of sexual scandals. Houston is taking what his daughter calls a sabbatical while he fights the charges against him. He's entered a not guilty plea to the accusation, and we'll see what happens. I think they're predicting that this is going to take the whole year, and who knows whether he'll be able to come back from that. I know you've been following this too.
We often hear about the loss of trust in institutions, especially among younger people. And then you hear a story like this and you say, is it any wonder? Because there's so many other examples of things like this.
Is it any wonder that
In
millions
different streams of religion?
Yeah. Not just the white evangelicals, but in every stream of religion. Well, it's not just religion. You know, the big news yesterday, the CEO of CNN had to resign his position because of his, not so much that he had a romantic affair with somebody working there. I don't know whether that's against their protocols or not, but because he did not disclose it.
So often it's not the deed itself, but it's what happens around that.
Yeah.
Cover-ups.
It's the cover-up.
And things like that. And denials, which only compounds the original misdeed.
Indeed, and there's a lot of that going on in every field. And but I hate to see it here with Hillsong, even though they weren't my chief representative of Christianity. I don't like it when religious leaders of any kind are caught in a compromising position and in a way that discredits themselves and their work and the gospel that they preach. So we'll see what happens.
Well, a lot of people who have left Christianity or who never joined it, they don't differentiate. If they hear about something at Hillsong, they're not going to say, oh, that's only in this particular branch of Christianity.
Right. No, right.
They're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, unfortunately. No. And many smart people will tell you that incidents like these have affected, have accelerated the general religious disaffiliation.
You know, a couple of months ago, maybe back in December, I did a story on the decline and the reorganization of the Cincinnati Archdiocese of Roman Catholicism. And my guest, of course, was one of their professors and permanent deacons. And he talked about the impact of the whole sexual scandal in Roman Catholicism on driving the disaffiliation, the disgust, the disappointment that's affecting not only their archdiocese, but all over the country. Well, let's go from New York and Melbourne and Cincinnati down to Atlanta, Georgia. U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock preached the funeral oration for famed Black scholar Henry Mitchell. Warnock is pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where the funeral service was held. Mitchell was a native of Ohio and rose to become a pivotal figure in Black theological education. He earned degrees from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, Union Seminary in New York, California State University at Fresno, and Claremont School of Theology in California. Mitchell taught at Colgate-Rochester Divinity School in New York, the Ecumenical Center for Black Church Studies, Virginia Union University, and the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. He wrote 3 books on preaching, and he and his late wife published their story under the title Together for Good. My Facebook feed was full for the last week of young and old, black preachers, lay people, scholars, professors, eulogizing Dr. Mitchell. I never met him. I never read one of his books. I never heard him speak, but he had a reputation in the black religious community that was unparalleled. That was no one exceeded the reputation he had as being a leader, a teacher. Were you familiar with him, Tom?
I wasn't, but your sharing the story reminds me of something that I think is true and important, and it's really worth saying,
Okay.
especially because now is Black History Month. Of course, what I'm about to say should be said anytime,
Right.
but I want to say a word about just how great the Black theological tradition has been and the tradition of Black theological education and how important and positive they have been. Not perfectly so, but overall, yes, so important and so positive for the church, for Christianity, for theological education, for theology.
Yes.
So Henry Mitchell, and there's people like James Cone.
Right.
We could go on, but
On and on.
in so many ways, they have been, at least to my eyes and ears, probably some of the best expressions of Christianity, most
There's no
powerful and
there's no
beneficial.
question this is true. And some people regard them as the salvation of the
Mm,
church in America.
hmm
You know, I have reported on and played much of the music of the American Spiritual Ensemble. Last week, I attended their concert in Asheville. And I want to say to you, Tom, you work in public relations at Yale Divinity School, which has one of the premier schools of music in the country. Your people in the School of Music up there will know Everett McCorvey and the American Spiritual Ensemble. He is also the director of the National Chorale in New York City. He is a black man from Montgomery. He lives in Lexington, Kentucky. If you could work with your people to get that group of black, mostly black singers singing this theology from the margins, music from the margins, and how it's impacted American culture, American religious culture. Get them on your campus. I'm telling you, you'd probably get a raise from your president, just between me and you.
Thanks for that good input. I think you're probably right about that.
You know, Raphael Warnock, who we were talking about preaching this sermon at the funeral, is running for reelection in Georgia. And of course, I'm a Georgia voter. And as a matter of fact, last week I got 2 inquiries from the local Democratic Party wanting to know if I'd like to run for office as a Democrat. That's something else I'm trying to discern about as well. But anyway,
We need people to run for things, so you should give it some serious consideration.
I had it. Yes, I'm about to turn 72, but Trump started his political career older than that, didn't he?
He sure did.
The president is almost 80, isn't he?
He sure is.
Yeah.
Well, one way that Republicans have done so well politically is that they've really hustled and gone for offices across the board, including all kinds of local offices, state offices, national offices. And Democrats could be faulted for not exhibiting the same level of hustle and commitment. So I'm going to say go for it, Pastor Dwight.
Oh no, it looks like he has frozen on us.
That appears to be the case.
Oh goodness, how does this keep happening to us, Tom?
I know it's at least the second time this has happened.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably going to have to reboot his computer. If memory serves, that's what he did last time.
You are correct in that. Oh, and there he goes. So hopefully we'll have him back with us in just a second. Would you mind to share? You said earlier that Dr. Moody gave you an idea for a column. Would you want to talk about that for a second?
Well, it's going to take away our thunder because I know later in the program we're going to talk about the Supreme Court.
Mm. Well, just
And
kidding.
so let me just sort of tease the listeners and say that I'm very interested in the juxtaposition of politics and what's happening in terms of Christianity being able to appeal to the hearts and minds of people. And I'm interested in the idea that winning at one, losing in the other, and which is more important.
Ooh,
And
yes.
so these some of these important political victories, like the Supreme Court, are happening at the same time that Christianity is losing numbers and losing its ability to reach people and reach people's hearts. It's an interesting juxtaposition.
Do you think that that's coming into play with the recent announcement of the retirement and President Biden saying that he will put a black woman up for nomination?
Yeah, in the big picture sense, I mean, a lot of what's driving the behavior, the political behavior of a lot of more conservative Christian leaders is
Mm-hmm.
anger and fear about the way the country is changing,
Mm-hmm.
and very much including who's invited to the table now. The table used to be basically just white men, white Christian men were the only ones at the table.
Right.
And over
Oh,
the decades, more and more people are being invited to the table or trying to get to the table. And with some failures and some successes, the composition of people at the table is changing. And so if you're worried about this kind of thing, and then you hear that President Biden is going to nominate a black woman for the Supreme Court, then you think, well, here we go again, another example of this kind of frightening, horrible change being pressed upon us. We need to save America.
right, right. Oh gosh, just thinking about hearing that term gave me flashbacks to the uh, Trump presidency. But it looks like
I
we
hear
have
you.
Dr. Moody back with us. Can you hear us okay, Dr. Moody?
Well, I think I'm back.
Yeah.
I apologize for that technical difficulties.
What, you were gone? She
So
and I
what?
were having a great conversation.
Well, she should be a regular host on my show, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Hold on just a minute.
You were just about to talk about Bishop Joseph E. Strickland.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. The priest from Texas. The next news story is from Nashville, Tennessee. It's a good news, bad news day for Southern Baptist. Willie McLaurin was appointed the interim executive director of the executive committee of the convention. He's the first Black person to hold the top spot of any of the SBC institutions or agencies. His job will be complicated, of course, by the resignation of yet another top leader, Jeff Pearson, chief financial officer of the executive committee. He resigned, making him the third of the top three officers to resign since last summer when the executive committee agreed to a no-holds-barred investigation of their handling of the sexual abuse scandal in the Southern Baptist Convention. The executive committee came under fire from messengers to their annual meeting last June. I was there. They are now preparing for their 2022 meeting in June in California. I'm not sure that I'm going out there. But Tom, I know you have been following some on this story as well. First of all,
Change comes slowly, but it comes.
the the Southern Baptist Convention, of course, has been very fast to welcome Black churches into their fellowship. They've been very slow in welcoming Black leaders into positions of authority and decision making.
Yep, and it sounds like William McLaurin, I mean, congratulations to him, but it sounds like he really has his work cut out for him. And I say that in terms of the disarray in SBC administration,
Yes.
which you touched on, and the fact that the denomination has been losing so many people. I notice here that SBC lost 435,000 members in 2020. It's lost 2.3 million members, 14% of its membership nationwide since its peak in 2006. So as I say, he has his work cut out for him.
He has his work cut out for him. And the Southern Baptist Convention over the last couple of years, of course, has been racked not only by this social, but by the sexual abuse scandal,
Sure.
where they were not disciplining or even dealing with their ministers in churches who were abusing women. But they've also been racked by the Black Lives Matter thing. And of course, there's a substantial Trumpian element in all of this. You and I have talked about this before. And it's a sad case. I think the Southern Baptist Convention is in real trouble, more so than what their members think,
Really?
and more so than what the average pew person realizes. There's just all kinds of trouble at the very core of their structure. But, you know, this electing this man, we'll see if he can stick it out and exercise any kind of leadership, whether he's black or white. They need some kind of leadership, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. Now from Texas, let's go to Texas, our last story of the day. Bishop Joseph E. Strickland of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, has entered the news cycle, we might say, by publicly siding with a priest in Chicago who had been rebuked by his archbishop. The priest was an advocate of the Old Latin Mass, and the use of the Old Latin Mass has become the calling card for the conservative wing of the Catholic Church, especially that part of the church that's pushing back against Pope Francis. And Strickland, the bishop down in Texas, got involved. He's come to the defense of priests in New England and priests around the country, representing those who think the church under the church in general, since Vatican II, and the church under Francis in particular, has become much too politically liberal, much too socially liberal, and not nearly Catholic enough. It's almost the flip side of what's happening in some other denominations. And I know, Tom, you have been following this as well. There's a substantial there's a substantial Catholic population in New England and New Haven and other places. What's your take on this?
You know what, Dwight? It was my turn to freeze. And so
Yes.
I was out of it for about 45 seconds there. I just came in. You were asking what I think of the situation with Bishop Strickland.
Right.
Well, my take on it, and from what I've been able to learn reading up on it a little bit since you told me we were going to talk about it, is that his move is quite a big deal. It's being portrayed as unprecedented and breaking new ground in terms of challenging the Pope and challenging one of his brother prelates. So it seems to me like the Catholic hierarchy is like this country in that there are a lot of sharp political divisions. There's fierce battling for the upper hand, and seemingly, and this disturbs me, more escalation and higher stakes every day. It's upsetting.
Yes, and I feel very, very certain that Trump has a foot in this battle as well.
Really? How so?
Yes. Well, the conservative Christian movement in the United States is not just evangelical. It includes Pentecostal, it includes Orthodox, it includes Catholic, and there's a very conservative political and social element to all of these traditions in the United States. And so that the percentage of Catholics who vote for Trump is almost as high as the percentage of non-Catholic Christians voting for Trump. and being a part of that kind of vision of what it means to be both American and Christian in the United States.
Yeah, and this Trumpism that we see isn't just the substance of policy or politics, it's a style, it's a combativeness, it's a willingness to go next level in terms of how harsh you might be, unfettered in your attacks on others, and how bold you're going to be in expressing your own view.
Yes,
So it is. You can hear that echo in the story about Bishop Strickland.
this is very true. Well, these are all interesting stories. This is the news from the Meeting House today, brought to you by Perfecto Coffee. You can order your coffee, perfectocoffeeinc.com. These were former students of mine at Georgetown College, now working out in California. They make really good coffee. I give it to all of my guests, or most of my guests who are on the program in the Meeting House, and you can order your own. We'll be back in just a minute, and I'm going to introduce you to a very important article that has been written and published this week, and we're going to talk about it and talk about the Supreme Court. I'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Meeting House, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I'm your host and the founder of the Meeting House, Dwight A. Moody, coming to you today from studio on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, where I have a home. I want to introduce you to an article. I've linked this article to my newsletter this week, and if you are not a subscriber to the newsletter, I encourage you to go to the website at themeetinghouse.net, where all these podcasts and articles and commentaries and news summaries are there posted on the website. This is an article published by Vox Media, which is a wide-ranging news and information site headquartered in Washington, D.C. This particular article was written by their writer who specializes in the Supreme Court. His name is Ian Millhiser. Ian Millhiser. And the name of the article, the title of the article, you see it there on the screen. The Supreme Court is leading a Christian conservative revolution. A Christian conservative revolution. And he goes through the recent history of the Supreme Court with particular attention to all that has happened since Amy Coney Barrett was rushed onto the court during Trump's last days, and which her elevation to the court brought to the number of 6, the number of what we would call really right-wing or conservative, Republican, and religious jurists. We now have what many people, not only is the most conservative Supreme Court we've had maybe in a century, it may be the most religious Supreme Court we've had in a century. And what is so interesting about it is 6 out of the 9 on the court are Catholic or were raised and spent most of their life as Catholics. And the Catholic conservatism that they represent would be right in line with Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, that we were just talking about. That is, this represents perhaps a minority wing of the Catholic intellectual tradition, of the Catholic social justice tradition. This wing of the Catholic legal culture that now dominates the Supreme Court is also a part of the church that is nervous about Pope Francis and his liberalism, his progressivism. And that's what makes this particular a Catholic court so very interesting. It represents a part of the American legal culture and the American religious culture, but it does not represent the majority of the Catholics, even though 6 of the 9 people on the court, including 5 of the 6 conservatives, are Roman Catholic. In the article, Ian talks about the dramatic increase in the number of religious liberty cases that have been brought before the court in the 2 years since Amy Coney Barrett has been on the court. Some of this is because of the pandemic, but in almost every case, Ian draws these general summaries. Number 1, they're taking far more cases on religious liberty. Number 2, they are siding almost always with conservative Christian plaintiffs before the court. Third, they are not granting the same sort of hearing and success to religious groups that are not part of this conservative constituency. And he points out in his article that the court is hearing gladly and warmly and successfully those people who are part of the voting constituency of the Republican Party. And they are acting consistent with the many people who think that religion has been granted a raw deal, so to speak. That is, the conservative Christian movement in America, Protestant and Catholic, is full of grievance. They have all these grievances about how their ideas, their practices, their values, their traditions have been abused by the Supreme Court over the last 70 years. And finally, their voice is being heard at the very highest levels of the court. He goes through many of the court cases by name, beginning really with the Hobby Lobby case, in which a single man at the top of a large corporation was able to evade federal law about providing health care for his employees simply because one part of it violated his deeply held religious convictions.
Sure.
Tom, you've been following a lot of this. You've read this article. What's on your mind about it?
A Supreme Court of this shape and orientation is exactly the payoff from the Faustian bargain that conservative Christianity entered with Trump. Exactly the payoff they wanted. This is what they were aiming for. A lot of times during the Trumpian years, and I guess those years aren't over, when some pious Christians were asked why they supported Trump, this is one thing they would cite: because we need to get a Supreme Court that reflects us and that does what we wanted to do. This is the prize. And as this Vox article points out so alarmingly, that's what's happened. But I also want to put this in a different light, put it in a larger perspective, Dwight. You will note, and I think you will find it interesting, that this thing with the Supreme Court is happening at the same time as the decline of Christianity in our culture. Decline in terms of people's participation and belief and devotion. And so it seems to me like this movement of conservative Christianity or Christian conservatism right now is having lots of success at winning in politics. Not every battle, but lots of success winning in politics, winning key prizes like a Supreme Court that's dominated by conservative Christians, but losing when it comes to people's hearts and minds.
Wow.
It's a very interesting juxtaposition. And it's fascinating to ask which is more important, power or appeal. I know you have something to say about that.
I do. I want to say that I disagree with the headlines that some editor put on this article.
How's that?
Well, it uses the word leading a conservative Christian movement. But what I want to say is that the Supreme Court is at the tail end of this movement. This
Ah,
movement started back in the 50s. The Faustian bargain that you just referred to really was initiated not under Trump, but under Ronald Reagan, when
sure. It
the
goes way back.
religious, yeah, way back. And the religious conservatives have been wanting this to happen for 70 years. And it all started when the federal government got involved in race and education back in the 1950s. And this undergirds this broad Christian um, uh, pushback against the federal government. Much of what this Supreme Court is going to do over the next 20 years is pull the federal government out of many of the issues that they got involved in over the last 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's these people do not believe in the federal government telling the church anything when they can have services, even if there's a pandemic raging. These people do not believe that the federal government should regulate business and commerce. These people do not think that the federal government should be involved in education in any way. They refer to public schools as government schools.
Sure.
They don't believe that this federal government should be involved in any personal decisions in any way, except, of course, when it comes to abortion. They want the federal government involved in that. So the first thing I want to say about it is that this began 70 years ago. The second thing is to say it's a broad pushback against the federal presence in our lives. And you're going to see this on this court in a wide range of issues, including religion. But number three, as you have just said, Tom, this is not going to go down well for religion in America. A court that favors white Christian conservatives in the court of law time and time and time again is going to generate resentment, irritation, hostility, and rejection on the part of our wider culture. This whole thing is going to boomerang, as you pointed out just now.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
Is it better to have full churches or control the Supreme Court?
Yep, and it's not just the Supreme Court, but it's a lot of political offices.
It's
what
a lot
would
of
you rather have, the presidency or the Senate, or an ability to change hearts and minds for Jesus?
Yes. Thomas Jefferson wrote a very famous letter to the people of Danbury, Connecticut. Maybe
Sure.
you know this story.
Sure.
Where he uses that phrase, the wall of separation between church and state. And of course, these justices, in keeping with the many, many people over 70 years who put them in office, do not believe in a wall of separation.
Right.
And Justice Gorsuch said as much from the bench this last year when he referred to the so-called wall of separation, the so-called wall of separation between church and state. And as he concludes his article, things are about to change and change quickly and change drastically in the way the American legal structure deals with religion in our culture. And it's going to be drama. This is going to be a story every month for years.
Yeah, and as you point out, there's going to be fierce resentment and pushback against that. I don't know what form it's going to take, but people are not going to tolerate it.
I agree with this. I think it's going to
tolerate a political and legal structure that is so out of sync with where the majority of the culture is and where it's going.
Yes.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. It may take 10 years for the pushback to have an effect, but their vision of the role of the federal government and the role of religion in our culture is not sustainable.
Right. And it's not good. It's not good for the country. It's not good for believers. It's not good for the church. It's just like this temporary period where they can bask in political power and try to hold back the forces of cultural change for a little while, or at least convince themselves they're doing that through legal and political structures. But you can't hold back those cultural tides. through measures like those. You can't do it through legal and political means alone. Maybe you can for a while, but it heads to a place none of us would like, the kind of conflict and division and even violence in the worst cases.
No
So,
question
as
about it.
you and I said, it's not sustainable.
You need to write about that too, Tom.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to cook up a column. Maybe the next time there's a big Supreme Court moment
Yeah,
for, where they favor conservative
yeah,
religious
yeah.
interests. I'm
But
gonna have to jump in.
this angle that you are articulating, that this is not good in the long run for religion in America, is really a powerful angle. Them presenting their grievances and then crying about it and getting their way is not going to be good in the long run. It's going to hurt their witness and their effectiveness as in doing gospel work in these United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, thank you
Well,
for
Don, we
joining
just
me
need
again in the meeting. Yeah, it's been great.
somebody else is going to
And
hear that column idea and run with it now, Dwight. Darn. You
all
better
right.
move
Well,
quick.
I'll be back in just a minute. You're in the meeting house. I'm Dwight Moody, the host, Tom Krattenmaker, and I'll be back in just a minute with my column for the day.
Good seeing you today, Dwight.
Bye. You were in the meeting house where we have a conversation on religion and American life. My guest today has been Tom Krattenmaker of New Haven, Connecticut. He is a regular religion and values commentator and columnist for USA Today newspaper, and that's where I first read about his writings. I was driving across America in 2006. He had just been appointed to that position, and I read one of his columns and wrote him. He was out in Portland, Oregon at the time, and I met up with him, and we had a wonderful time. We've been good friends ever since. But I have a commentary for the day, and it's called Remembering the Rushdoony. I suspect most of you, very, very few of you, have heard of Rushdoony. I'm going to tell you about him today. It's easy to get Russus John Rushdoony confused with two things totally unrelated to him. Rushdoony has no connection to Rush, the popular radio talk show host who dominated the markets for decades before dying of cancer in 2021. Except this, both of these people, Rushdoony and Rush, rose to fame and influence, and one of them, Rush, rose to great fortune by carving out in articulate and compelling fashion conservative alternatives to dominant cultural values. We've largely forgotten about Rush. You don't hear him mentioned anymore, and most have not yet heard of Rushdoony, but you will, really, before you reach the end of this commentary today. Also, I want to point out that Rushdoony has no connection to Dominion, a company now in the midst of a legal tussle over its perceived role in, quote, quote, stealing the 2022 presidential election from Donald J. Trump. Quote, with a strong history of innovation, collaboration, high caliber engineering, and continuous research and development, Dominion's technological offerings are unparalleled, end quote. That's from their website. But none of that has anything to do with the way Rushdoony used that very same word, dominion. He took it from the biblical book of Genesis, and I quote from the gender-neutral language, quote, God created human beings in God's own image. In the image of God, God created them, male and female, God created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and have dominion over it. It's that phrase, have dominion over it, that has caused so much commotion. Rushdoony took that to mean believers, and of course, a certain kind of believer, his kind of believer, are to have dominion over everything, not just the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the animals that scurry along the ground, to quote the Bible again, but everything, especially things unrelated to fish, the birds, the animals that scurry along the ground. Rushdoony laid out an interpretation of Holy Scripture that has been embraced by a widening host of preachers, pastors, and people in the pews of some American churches. He wrote it all down, of course, in a series of books, the chief of which is a 3-volume set entitled Institutes of Biblical Law, published 1973. I've not read these books. I don't know anybody who has. But we're all at the mercy of the tsunami of silliness that is even now overwhelming people normally of sound body and mind. The institutes describe how and why Christian people are called to seize control, that is, to have dominion, and the leadership of all aspects of American society. His followers categorized this command into 7 areas: religion, family, education, government, arts, media, and commerce. These 7 are known as the 7 mountains of cultural influence. The 7 mountains of cultural influence. Even as I speak, loyal followers of this novel approach to social influence are scheming to take over some organization near you, perhaps a congregation, or a school board, or a state legislature, even the White House. Rushdoony is no longer around. He died in 2001, 87 years after he was born to Armenian immigrants who barely escaped the massacre of their own people in Turkey. His father organized the Armenian Martyrs Presbyterian Church in California. His other son, Mark, described things this way, quote, "My father grew up with very keen awareness that the Armenian people had been massacred, their culture extinguished, their history rewritten because they were Christians in a non-Christian culture," end quote. Mark's brother, the aforementioned Rusas John Rushdoony, also grew up under the influence, that very same influence. But he found a way to envision a future for conservative Protestants, even evangelical American Christians, to push back against what they saw and still see as the gradual extinguishing of their once bright light in America. It is called dominionism. Take charge, they say, of everything. It is highly likely that you have scant awareness of this takeover effort, at least under that nomenclature. It's impacted greatly other elements of conservative culture in these United States, such as the homeschooling movement, which they postures over against what they call the government schools, and the large family movement, also known as quiverful, taken from Psalm 127. But those two lead us into a much larger story. One-time presidential advisor and longtime cultural warrior Howard Phillips, who died in 2013, once described Rushdoony as, quote, "the most influential man of the 21st century," and asserted further that the whole Christian conservative political movement has its genesis in him. Not in Rush, the radio host, but Rush, the author, philosopher, theologian, who died in 2001. Rusas John Rushdoony. Don't get him confused with other things and other names, but don't ignore him. And don't ignore those who, unlike me, have read him and now embrace his call to, quote, "have dominion over all things," including some club, some court, some country near and dear to you. Pay attention. It's part of the Christian nationalist movement of which I've been speaking and writing. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse. That's my commentary for the day. I'll be back in just a minute with a few concluding thoughts. You've been in the Meetinghouse this morning with me, your host, Dwight A. Moody. I'm coming to you today from our studio in Glenn County, Georgia, Brunswick, Jekyll Island, and St. Simon's Island. As soon as this program is over, in just a minute, I'm going to get in my car and head across the causeway to Jekyll Island, show my brother around. I encourage you to come down, get out of that snow and cold and wind and ice, and come on down to Georgia where it's sunny today. Tomorrow it's supposed to be 80 degrees. It's nice weather. Thank you for your interest in the Meetinghouse. I encourage you to go to our website at themeetinghouse.net. You'll find this up as a podcast within 24 hours, along with all the other podcasts. You'll find many commentaries, including the one that I just read for you today about Rushdoony. There are many other book reviews, and of course, all the news summaries are there as well. Plus, I have a special page with links to all of the important religion news sites in America. These are sites that I visit frequently as I put together the program, and I encourage you to go to these sites. And they include sites for Muslim, Jewish, Christian, liberal Christian, Catholic, Protestants, secular, all sorts of news sites where you can learn about what's going on in religion in America. You might want to visit our support page. I need your support. As you can tell by today, I need some new equipment. The equipment that I've been using died again today. I've been putting this off for a long time, but I need to replace this equipment with better equipment that doesn't cause audio and video problems on a consistent basis. You can go to themeetinghouse.net/support, and there you'll have some information about how you can join what we call our Circle of 70. I'm seeking 70 people to be donors. We're about halfway there. You could be a donor, you could be a supporter, you can join the Circle of 70 and help support what we're trying to do here in the Meetinghouse. That is, be a voice of progressive, open, curious, interesting, religious culture in America. I'm Dwight Moody. I started this back in 1998 when I was on the faculty of Georgetown College. I'm an ordained Baptist preacher. I'm the pastor of a small Baptist church in Hendersonville, North Carolina right now. And yet I have a wide open vision about what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, and what we need in the United States here. I have conversation with people from the right to the left, and many of you like this very much. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for your interest. Join us again next week when we'll have another conversation on religion and American life. Until then, I encourage you to have a good day. This is Dwight Moody saying so long.
You have been in the Meetinghouse with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news,